Thank you so much, Glenn. It is such a pleasure to be joining today, and thank you all to all the guests who are joining, and really excited to be kind of sharing some bits and pieces here as well. I'm going to just share my screen now. I've got a few bits, obviously, to take you all through today, and I guess today's conversation is really around thinking of ourselves as leaders, thinking of ourselves in the challenges that we actually face as leaders, and what that looks like. So I wanted to kick us off with a little picture here. So this is me. This is me actually when I was at Codefest Girls. And this picture was taken at our annual conference, and it was held at Twitter. It's an amazing organization. It's still running and been very successful. They focus on supporting women into tech. And this is really sort of around that mission on what can we do to help people grow, and how can we kind of help people and support people through that. And it was a really amazing day. The challenge is that, about 6 months after this picture was taken, I had to fire one of the people in this picture. And it was one of the hardest things that I've had to do. And I think especially as someone who is leading a mission-focused companies, which is focused on growth, that tension between, trying to be supportive, trying to, meet your mission, to add value to the world, to add value to your clients, as well as obviously manage your business. It's a really tough thing to balance. And I think something that probably a lot of the people who are joining today have gone through one way or the other. So as Glenn very kindly mentioned, my name is Amali. I'm the Managing Director of Microsoft for Startups. I'm a former entrepreneur myself. My job today largely focuses on supporting other businesses to grow, so supporting other founders as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that balancing act that we all have to walk as a leader. And what are some of those common things that we will hit? What are the things that I have found helpful to help myself think about the balancing act, but also what are the common patterns that I see within the startups that I work with, and from having run the businesses as well. So what do we mean when we're talking about these the dichotomy of leadership and those conflicts that we might face? And what are the kind of things that might cause some of that tension within companies as well? When I think about that, it really is a sort of a balancing act. And then there are lots of things that we balance as business leaders. You might be looking at things like, how do you balance growth against the money, either that you're spending, your budgets, or the money that you're getting into your business. You might be thinking about, how can you be supportive in the face of adversity, and obviously something which is very topical at this moment in time. A lot of us have gone through challenges, and certainly from my side, I'm supporting a lot of businesses going through those challenges as well. We can be thinking about how to make those hard choices while staying human. And this is always a really difficult one, because there are sometimes occasions where we'll find those are contradictory, or those are pulling us in different directions to think about those two sort of aspects of running a business as well. But hopefully, I think, in this discussion today, I'd like to, I guess, share a bit more about that, and really think about, when all of those things are coming down on us, how might we go about pulling those apart, and what are the kind of things that we can do to actually set really good foundations, so that it is less of a struggle when we try to do these deal with these issues as we go through our business as well. So let's kick ourselves off on one of the big ones, right? And especially as an entrepreneur, as someone running a small business, as a startup, growth against money. And how do you bring in money? How do you reduce your spend of money in order to drive growth within your business? It's a really big one. And it's also a slightly strange one, because when we think about the money that we put into our businesses, are we really thinking about money? I would say that from my experiences, what we're really thinking about, rather than it being money, is actually about what money can do, which is to buy us time. And when we think about what we spend our money on, we can be thinking about hiring people, right? So you're buying more time, more human time into your business. When you're thinking about, I don't know, buying a CRM system to help you manage your clients better. We're thinking about time. How do we do that more efficiently? When we're thinking about building platforms or bringing in tools where we can help to manage our people better, again, it's about giving yourself more time or more efficient use of time as a way to drive the growth of your business and give you time then to go and do other things which will go and drive the business as well. So really, when we're thinking about growth and the trade-off there, we're really thinking about growth and time. And what are the strange things about time is that, especially when we're thinking about building a business, actually, sometimes you need to spend time to save time. And this is the old adage of, a stitch in time saves nine. But what we need to do as business leaders is think about how we can spend that time cleverly, because not all spending of time is equal. And there are better places that you can be spending your time to actually drive growth within your business. So let's have a little bit of a think about some of those things. When I think about the time that I spend, something which I think is always a really good use of time is spending time understanding your finances. And this for me, I guess, was a lesson which I learned fairly early on in my career. So I used to work on my early companies after I graduated, was working at a company called TNS. They're a brand and research consulting firm. And when I joined, fairly soon after I joined, they were actually bought by WPP, so the big media company. And this had obviously a huge impact on the business. And one of the things was how we looked at our finances. And the reason being that at the time, WPP, they were listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And one of the requirements to being listed is that you have to be SOX compliant. And one of the things you need to do in order to be SOX compliant is actually to publish your financials on a quarterly basis. Now, this was a big challenge for a company which maybe had been publishing their financials on an annual basis or a biannual at most, to try and do something which was much more frequent. And actually, Martin Sorrell, who was the chief executive of WPP at the time, said, actually, I don't even want to do it monthly. I don't want to do it quarterly. I want to do it monthly. So you can imagine what sort of a fundamental change this was to that business, to think about how they managed their money. And the way that they did that, the way that they executed that and kind of rolled that out efficiently, was actually to push understanding of financials all the way through the company, even to the very junior levels. And for me, as a sort of a junior manager at the time, that meant that even as a junior manager, I needed to understand, how much I was costing my jobs at, what were my margins, what were my contributions, what did that profit contribute to the business? And I had to report that. So I had to actually sit down with my director on a monthly basis and work through my monthly forecast. Where was I over? Where was I under? And that lesson that I learned, all those years ago has really served me well, even going into the roles that I have now, particularly running a business, thinking about how attention to my finances and understanding the fundamental building blocks of where that money goes is such an important way to save yourself time and money into the future as well. The next point is around people. It was really interesting. So when I was chief exec of Codefest Girls, I remember I think someone asked me a question probably about a year into me being there. And the question was, what were the surprises? It was the first time for me taking on a leadership role. What were the things that I hadn't prepared for or that I found were a little bit different? And I think the biggest thing for me was around how much time I spent managing people. And this wasn't even just directly sort of managing people and obviously spending time, speaking to people and all of these kinds of things, but, how much time I had to spend into people processes, how much time I had to spend into, making sure we were recruiting properly, that our processes around recruitment were correct, how much time I needed to spend on managing people. So did we have the right systems in place, the right frameworks in place to kind of evaluate people, to help them progress through the company? I think that was the biggest surprise. And it is time well spent. And, it should really be an obvious thing. But when we think about a small business, let's say you've got 5 employees, one person there has is 20% of your resource into your company. And if we were to think about, what a 20% loss would be, let's say around, I don't know, income or your budgets or something like that, we would inevitably as leaders turn around and say, gosh, that's a huge thing. We need to pay attention to this. And yet we so often don't spend that time when it comes to how we manage our people. We will copy and paste job specs without really thinking about, is it the right thing we're looking for? We will rush interview processes. We will put out briefs for what we need for a team without really consulting with the teams and thinking about how that can work. So thinking about people, spending time on people related things is always a good thing to spend time on. And obviously a really critical thing as far as how do you then save yourself time and save yourself from making mistakes in the future. That's a really important thing there as well. And then the last thing in that sort of growth versus time sort of conundrum is really thinking about your customer product cycle. And I call it the customer product cycle because we often in our companies, we will separate out our marketing teams, we will look at sales, we'll look at product development, customer research, all of these kind of things. But really it's all one thing, right? Which is the relationship between how we look at our customers, how we develop products, and how we then promote those products to drive more customers. So for example, with a small company, you will often start with a customer need. So there's some sort of gap in the market, there is something that people need. Can they actually, is there something that you can do to develop a product with that? And then once you've basically developed that product, you'll push that out in the market, you'll have sales teams, you'll have partnerships, all of these kind of things. And if that's done properly, and if you have the right sort of responses to your original hypotheses around those customers, you hopefully grow your customer base, and then the cycle repeats again. So really spending time understanding those different elements, but most importantly also communicating those elements to your teams and the interdependencies between them so that they can understand how what they do has an impact on other teams' success, and how together that has an impact on the success of your company is a really, really critical thing to do as well. The next challenge. Being supportive through points of adversity. This is a really topical one, and I am almost certain that everyone on this call has had to have conversations recently which have been around either supporting or looking for support through some sort of business or personal challenge. And how you turn up as a leader and how you support your teams, how you support your clients through adversity is really, really important. And it's often something which, is having to be done whilst you yourself are going through difficult times as well. So what are the kind of things that we as business leaders can do to actually address some of these things? The first thing that I would say is really focus on communication. And I put here around being translucent but not transparent. And I do think that's an important thing. We talk a lot about, transparency with communications, and especially around your teams and what you share. There is such thing as oversharing. And I think it's important to realize that as a business leader, there are certain things which your teams can't help you with. They are your problems that you need to find support elsewhere and address. Your teams aren't necessarily looking for you to have answers to everything. You're a human being, you're not psychic, but you do have an expectation to be supportive. You do have a role to build confidence. And there is an expectation from your team that even if you don't know all the answers, that you can articulate what the problems are, that you can build confidence, that you've thought about what that looks like, and that you can also help them to sort of see what you might be doing to actually address some of those challenges and move things forward. So that's a really important thing. And, knowing where to draw that line, that is a balancing act. But I think it's a really important thing to think about. Look, am I doing something where, am I just burdening my team, or am I helping my team? Am I giving direction, helping them through adversity, or am I just hindering them to actually get on and deal with their own situations and help us all to kind of be more productive with that as well? The second part, and this really ties into the first part, which is that you as a business leader need advice too. And time spent developing your support network is never time wasted. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. You know, we have a lot of conversations about mentoring and support and advisory boards and these types of things. And depending on who you are and how you work, different things might work better for you. But there is nothing which can sort of beat just having people who you can trust and who you can go to get a bit of both support and in some cases to get a bit of friendly tire kicking. Someone who can hold you honestly to task as far as where you are moving forward with things, and be that avenue for you when you yourself are going through difficult, you know, decisions to be making, and can kind of be an advisor to you. And those relationships need to be nurtured even outside of the time that you're going through those issues. So time spent working and developing those networks, those support structures, is a really helpful thing to do, and never a waste of time. And then the last one is around outside support. So we talked a little bit there about sort of you needing advice from outside as well, but actually to think about when your advice is not enough for your teams, for your clients, is really important as well. And, you know, this is really about recognizing what your limits are as a leader, and what, you know, my limits are, for example, as a leader. I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor. You know, in some cases where people are going through grief, when they might be ill, where they might be stressed with how do I manage home life, you know, under lockdown, all of these types of things, there are absolutely things that I can do as a leader to help them with that. But there is a point where I need to recognize that this is the limit of my professional ability. And I need to bring in people, or put people in touch with people who can actually help them to do that more effectively. So whether that's, if you have budgets, bringing in people who are occupational psychologists, mentors, coaches, these types of things, or putting them in touch with external organizations who can actually help them with some more serious issues as well. I think that's a really important thing. So just to kind of remind yourself that you have a role to play in supporting people through adversity, but you don't need to be supporting them through everything, and it's not right for you to be supporting people through everything. And then just going on to, I guess, that sort of last challenge and sort of balancing act, making hard choices whilst remaining human. And, you know, going back to that first picture that I showed you from myself at Codefest Girls, that was really sort of, you know, one of those points where I had to really sort of balance my needs of the business versus my genuine will to support and to help, and thinking about, you know, was this the right place for us to be doing that together with this, you know, particular individual. It's never an easy thing to do. And I think, you know, where you have good support structures, that helps. But ultimately, as a leader, you will need to be the one making that decision. And so what are the kind of things that you might be thinking about? What are the kind of things that might help you to strike that balance? For me, this is kind of a three-step thing, and it really rests on, first, being empathic, second, giving good explanations around things, and third, to actually give options where possible. And I guess breaking that down a little bit more, when we talk about being empathic, I think it's really important to think about what the human response will be if you have to deliver bad news to someone, and whether that's your team, whether that's your, you know, your clients, whoever that is, you know, really thinking about what is the emotion that's going to be triggered by me having this conversation? What is the impact going to be on their lives? And I don't think it's, you know, it's not from the purpose of, you know, you think about all of these things and that means you go into a corner and then have to sort of cry to yourself and kind, you know, don't know how to move forward. But it is about saying, look, can you connect with this person's human journey when you are having to deliver something which is going to disrupt their lives or disrupt their work? And where possible, going to that second point about explanation, giving an explanation as to the reasons for that decision. It doesn't make it easier to take, but people can understand that. And I think going back to the previous points we were talking about, you know, thinking about, for example, how you manage your finances, how you communicate, all of that will help with your explanation, because the explanation shouldn't just be about what you deliver at that point. It should be reflective of the things which you have been talking to before. So for example, if you're having to, you know, downsize a team, if you were managing your finances more effectively up front, it can help. It doesn't avoid, but it can help you to identify better when there might be trouble down the line. When you know that that is the case, that's the point at which you should be articulating to your teams, okay, folks, this is what our targets are. This is how the work of this team is going to be impacting this. And this is how your work together is going to be impacting our business. So that if you do, you know, heaven forbid, get to the point where you have to downsize a team, even though it's painful, people can understand your thinking. They can empathize with you around why you are having to come to that decision. So really, you know, giving those explanations can be really helpful. And then that last point, which is about giving people options. So I saw a really amazing tweet actually earlier this week, which was a man who was having to downsize his team and was very sadly having to fire 5 people from his team. And what he had done was that prior to having that conversation with them to say, look, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go, he had actually lined up an opportunity, a further job opportunity for every single person that he was having to lay off. He had reached out to some of their old companies in some cases who were happy to take them back. He had reached out to new companies who were willing to hire these people and who were happy to have that conversation. So when he went into that conversation, a very difficult conversation to say, look, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go, he gave them options and said, but we have a way forward for you. And I'm not saying that necessarily we can always do that. You know, that's a really time intensive thing. It's wonderful if you can do. But I do think that thinking about what those options might be, whether it's, you know, further training support, whether it's, you know, other jobs, other companies who might be hiring, whether it's, you know, letting, you know, your networks know that you're having to make these decisions, but these are some amazing people and how can they be supported? That can really help with, again, having those conversations and balancing those conversations in a more empathic way and in a way that people feel that you have been thoughtful of them, even if you're having to make a bad decision. The second point, and this was something which my best friend actually told me when I was having a conversation with her about a difficult decision that I was going to have to make, where I couldn't see a right option. And what she said to me was, Amali, you have to come to terms with the fact that you will always have regrets. And this was a really meaningful thing for me to kind of take on board. And I think, especially as a leader, you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that hindsight is always 20/20. Sometimes there are no perfect solutions, and you have to cut yourself some slack sometimes around recognizing that you will never be able to make always the right decisions. The only thing you can say to yourself is, did I make the right decision at that point in time? And acknowledge the fact that there will be times that you will regret the decision that you make, but that doesn't mean that it was the wrong decision at the time. It may have been the wrong decision in hindsight, but it was a right decision at that point. And then the last point, which is around passion and fit. And that passion doesn't always mean fit. And this was a hard-learned lesson for me, leading a mission-led company where we were incredibly passionate about sort of supporting people. And I can be honest, I mean, I never had trouble finding people who were passionate about what we did. Passion wasn't the issue. And passion is critical. You can't have people who aren't, you know, believers in your company, believers in what you're trying to do. But at the same time, you need people who also have a passion for the job. And I think this is a really important thing to spend time on to help you balance that struggle between, you know, when is it, you know, a hard choice and when can you be human, is to understand, first of all, where is the difference between finding people who have a passion for what we are doing as a business versus a passion for the role that they will need to play in delivering success to that business. And it's not just around employees either. I think especially sort of, you know, running mission-led companies, and I support and mentor a lot of founders of mission-led companies. This is a really important thing to think about just from an individual basis as well. I meet a lot of founders who have incredible visions for how they want to change the world and how they want to make a difference. Whether or not they have passion for being a leader, you know, passion for, you know, the financial side of things, passion for the customer side of things, that is another question which I think, you know, we all need to sort of reflect on ourselves and just make sure that we're happy with that and comfortable with that, because they're not often the same things. And I think for business leaders, for anyone who's kind of moving into that kind of role, thinking about, you know, do I you know, am I just, you know, passionate about what the company is doing, or do I really, you know, have a passion for all the different bits which I might need to do, which need to go into that, or do I need to either find people who can do that for me and hire those people and find support from those people, or am I actually better off working for a company who shares that passion, but where I'm not actually having to take that leadership role on, which has sort of other things which I need to do. I think that's really important as well. So that's my, I guess, my little talk through, I guess, some of those challenges there as well. You know, fingers crossed there might be a few questions. And I guess at this point, I'll head back to you, Glenn. You know, you've supported me certainly when, you know, with Codefest Girls, and did an incredible job actually helping us explore some of these things. So, you know, do those things resonate? And I guess, you know, you've known our story, you know, through that side as well. Are these things that you see in some of those other companies and stuff? And
100%. I mean, to be fair, Amali, you touched upon a number of things that you and I have discussed previously, and we're both very passionate about when it comes to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, let's get straight into the questions, because they're starting to fire through. And I want to start with Andrew, because I think he's been really very open and very candid here. He said, look, what can you do if you are not empathetic? He said, look, I don't think I'm particularly empathetic. I'm more fact-based, fact-focused, should I say, and less emotionally aware. What kind of advice would you give him?
I would actually, and it's a really important question. And actually, I would draw a lesson here from one of my colleagues. So one of my colleagues, our Western European CTO for Microsoft Startups, is an amazing man called Ian McDonald. And he is one of the most considerate, one of the kindest, one of the biggest champions for diversity that I know. And I say this as someone who's worked in the diversity industry. He is also high functioning autistic. He self-declares himself as Asperger's. And he will openly talk about how he really struggles with empathy. He struggles to read people. He struggled to know how to react to people, how he was coming across to people. And he had the blessing of having a woman who ended up being a sort of a mentor and a coach to him, and taught him how to behaviorally hack that for himself. And it's an incredible thing which he kind of does when he has conversations with people, when he is looking to support people through those kind of difficult times. And he has almost built himself a sort of a framework, right? Logic and process is something he understands, right? And he goes through these little checklists for himself to help himself think about, look, if I'm going to say something, what might a reaction be to this? You know, what are the things that I could say which might, you know, help with this? Or, you know, what are other people, who do I call to get a second opinion about this, and whatever it is. But he has built himself a list of checks which he can use when he knows he's going into a situation which might be an emotionally difficult one, to help him process that and work with that. And I think this is where you can build that checklist for yourself, but also don't feel afraid to bring in other people who you know are good at doing that. You know, bring in support, people who can be empathetic, have those conversations ahead of time if you're worried about, you know, having those afterwards. You know, if you're, let's say, having to downsize a team, bring in a few people who you knew can give you advice around this and say, look, this is what we're going to have to do. What are people going to be feeling going through this? What can we do? And don't feel that you need to do that alone. And I think preparation, I think in this instance is really key. And then again, sort of building those checks when you're having to do it more on the block, I think can really help there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's get into some more questions. So Mags asks, how do you try to be a leader when having a personally challenging time? How much can you lean on your team? I think that's a really good question.
It's a really tough one. And I think this is the leader's burden, right? Which is, and, you know, being especially sort of as a former entrepreneur, someone who led a small company, it can be really lonely. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, when you see sort of accelerators and incubators, they often advise, you know, having co-founders as people who you can share that burden with, because it is a burden at times. I do think that it is about thinking, though, who do I share that burden with? And I think recognizing that being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you take on the burden alone all the time. But deciding who you share the burden with, I think is the really critical one, because it might be that in some cases, it's actually not your team who's right to share that burden with. Because by sharing that burden with them, if they can't play a role in helping you with that, all you do is you make them feel helpless. You leave them in a situation where they may not feel as confident in your ability to be a leader. And instead, what is better to do is to take that burden and have conversations with other business leaders who might be going through the same situation, have conversations with coaches, have conversations with mentors, people you trust, whoever it is that is your support network, to spread that load, because you do need help. It's not always your team who are the right people to help you with that.
That's an interesting one, and I'm going to bring this question up from Jimmy, one of our panelists, because he's a Ned for tech startups. And he said, look, you must see plenty of founders hiring their friends or people who are passionate, only to discover that neither makes them right for the business. I think probably what he's looking to kind of identify there is how do you litmus test that, through a kind of a conversation, possible recruitment process. How do you know that person exceptionally well is going to be the right fit for your tech startup?
Yeah. And I've done it. I'm guilty of having hired people who not necessarily friends, but people who were passionate in some cases, but who weren't a right fit for the role. And I think it almost goes back to that point, to the customer product cycle, right? And I think when you're thinking about your people and what role they play, thinking about where they fit in that cycle, what do you need them to do? What targets, what responsibilities will they have to that? And then when you're interviewing them, when you're having those discussions with them, probing into that area around, look, this is the job that I need you to be doing in this company. This is the job. This is not the passion. I know you're passionate. I know you believe in me. I know you believe in the company, but this is what I will need you to do. How would you go about doing that? What would happen if these things were to, sort of scenario planning? What would happen if, let's say, we were struggling with building revenues? How would you react to that? And that will help you to pull apart, is this person capable of taking on that challenge? And I think that also helps with the diversity as well, which is, focusing on the job that needs to be done, rather than necessarily, where their CV might say they will be. You want to see, are they able to respond to the challenges you will place them in by joining your business? And talking to that point, and I know we didn't sort of go into huge detail there, but when you're specially constructing a small team, and that point around hiring your friends, we all sort of, it's an easy thing to do, and you're time strapped, you're money strapped. You want people who can buy into you, who trust you, who can sort of, follow you and trust your leadership. But remember that when you've got a small team, having people who can challenge your thinking and bring in external thinking, bring in different views, is actually a great way to bring resilience into your company. And you will build better products and services by bringing in other people who can help you to build your business in a more constructive way. And sometimes that may not always be bringing in people that you deal with.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, really interesting. You kind of touched upon the diversity piece there as well. It's kind of like, hiring for the role and the challenge ahead, as opposed to, like you say, and there is a temptation, right? Somebody and you trust. It's an easy win, isn't it, to immediately kind of say, look, just come on board. I'm sure there's some stuff you can do. I'm just going back through my notes, and you may mention to kind of translucent, not transparent. And now for a leader that's kind of, starting their journey, kind of defining that line might be quite challenging. Have you got any kind of tips for them?
I think that one of the things which keeps me honest when I kind of have those conversations is, what do I expect people to do when I tell them this? And if the answer that comes back at me is, there is nothing they can do, or it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't help them to do things more efficiently, then that's generally a good gut check of, this is not something which is the right thing to have a conversation about. That doesn't mean that there isn't an important element of sharing. So for example, around sharing financial success of your company. Are you doing well? I do think that there are ways for you to have those conversations. So for example, to say, look, this is what we needed to achieve. This is what we have achieved. And these are the things which are either going to help us or where we're not reaching and isn't going to help us do that. But then these are the things which we can do to address some of those challenges. So thinking about how you have some of those really difficult conversations, I think is important. But yeah, sort of going and saying, oh, we've only got, you know, £7.50 in the bank, and, you know, actually, you know, one of our clients isn't going to be, you know, talking to us. That's going to be a really difficult one for someone to take on, and just know how to help. I think this is the thing, especially with companies and small companies particularly. If you hire good people, they want to help, right? They want to help your business. They want to make things successful. Allowing them to know how they can help, I think, is really important. So just keeping that in the back of mind, I think, can really help with that.
Definitely. And you made mention as well in terms of kind of getting kind of external support outside the organization and bringing in individuals that are kind of specialists. Now, what if you're kind of working in a company where that kind of notion, that kind of approach is a little alien, and you've kind of got to do a bit of work internally to get people on board with the idea of kind of bringing in that kind of external support to support you first, and then perhaps the team. Have you, could you give us some guidance as to how you would approach those particular conversations, how you would frame them?
Yeah. It's an important one. And I think, the challenge of how you bring people with you is one of the biggest things that you learn, I think, sort of, moving into leadership roles, which is there is a certain, and I kind of, I like to draw the comparison of sometimes it's a little bit carrot, sometimes it's a little bit stick, right? And I do think that this is to that point of the hard decisions a leader makes. There are absolutely things that you can do and should do to help people to understand why you are making this decision. It's also on you as a leader, when you bring in these people, to be really clear about what you want these people to achieve, because especially in a small company, time is precious, right? If you're bringing people in who are supposed to come in and fix a problem or help you to think about how to fix a problem, and they don't do that, you can understand why people feel frustrated with that. So first of all, make sure that you're kind of speccing this properly and bringing in the right people. Yeah. But then when you're actually bringing those people in and people are feeling a bit reluctant, I think helping people to understand your decision-making process, and you will always get, inevitably you may get people who just don't buy it. They haven't seen it. They don't understand it. They don't see the benefits. And at that point, you just have to say, look, I know you may not see why we're doing this, but I need you to trust me on this. This is on me. If this doesn't help us to figure these things out, then that's something that I take on. But we're doing this as a business because I believe that it's the right thing for us to do. And I think it's going to help us to do this. And 9 times out of 10, what you'll often find is it's not that the thing won't be helpful. I think back to one of my old directors who, when I used to work in sort of design industry and stuff. And I remember turning up to one of my reviews with him with these lovely sort of, sketches and stuff like that. And he was just like, Amali, you've put the pictures here, you've put the colors here, put it all together. People have no imagination, right? And I think this is always a really important thing to remember, that sometimes if you haven't gone through, if you haven't seen it, it's very hard to imagine something. So the only way that you will really get people convinced is by taking them through that process. And sometimes that means turning around to them and saying, you know what, I know you may not be 100% understanding why we're doing this, but you're going to have to bear with me. I strongly believe there's going to be of value to us, and this is why.
So I've got a pretty challenging direct one for you, and I know you're very open about your kind of personal stories. So what's the hardest thing that you've had to kind of, I guess, deal and manage with as a leader and an entrepreneur? Now that, either the hardest thing or decision or something along those lines, what challenge have you kind of met and that wasn't possibly even visible to begin with? And kind of how did you overcome that?
I mean, I've talked a little bit about the people challenge already, and so I won't go into that. And I think that's probably the hardest thing, as far as being able to lead with authenticity, being able to be empathic, being able to do, to strike that balance. The second thing, which I think was the hardest, was in a way getting over my squeamishness as a leader with some things. And I think especially when you're running a small business, and I'll give you an example. So when I was at Codefest Girls, we had a campaign which we launched, which was to, had a goal. It was called our 2020 campaign. And the goal was to get 20,000 young women to code by the end of 2020, which I'm very glad to say they are on track to do. In order to do that, Codefest Girls needed to book £1 million in revenue, right, to deliver to these 20,000 young women. And I had a really amazing conversation actually with, he was a head of development basically, and actually one of our sister companies, Entrepreneur First, really, really amazing guy. And he's basically their sort of rainmaker. So he helps them to generate revenue. So I remember sitting down with him at one point and sort of saying, okay, this is how I'm going to approach it. And I'm a pretty logical person. I like, to think through. This is my proposition. This is what I think my pricing will be, all of these kind of things. And he turned around, and I was basically saying, what do I go with? What option is the correct option here? And he said to me, Amali, you know what? Forget about the balancing act of the proposition versus the pricing and all of this kind of thing. Go out, have a conversation with someone, set a price, make it up, I don't know, go and ask for £100,000 and offer them nothing and see what they say. Now, this for me was a kind of it went against the grain of everything that kind of I would ever have done working at a company and working with clients, which is you always go in with a proposition, you always go in with a value add. And I do believe in that. And I take that approach, of mutual gains to that. But shaking that free for a little while was really important. And I remember that first conversation that I had where I did that, which was, maybe I shouldn't have done it with quite so high profile a person, but it was with a woman who was the chief of staff for Virgin Media. And I remember getting on this call, and she had been connected to me by another really valuable connection of mine. So she was someone who I wanted to kind of be respectful of. And I remember sort of saying to her, we're doing this, we're teaching 20,000 women how to code. What I'm asking from Virgin Media is £100,000 to help us do this. And she turned around quite legitimately and said, okay, so what are we going to get for that? At which point I had to turn around and basically just say, well, you get a branding and profile, but otherwise, that you're just helping us to do amazing things. And I remember hearing this sort of silence on the end of the phone. And she sort of, after about 20 seconds, she was like, well, I'm not sure if that's really going to work for us. But if you think about your proposition a bit more, and once you have something else, I'll take another call from you. And bless, she did actually take a call from me, and she invested with me. But for me, as a sort of a very organized, very kind of thinking on both sides kind of person, to just actually let go of that, to leave my personal kind of ickiness behind for the sake of my company, because it taught us a huge amount. That discussion taught me an awful lot from, how would a company react to that? How would I need to look at things? What was their needs? And it forced me to listen to what they wanted me to say, rather than going in with what I was willing to offer. And that was a really important thing, I think, for me to learn.
That sounds, whilst it sounds challenging for you personally, it sounds like a really kind of enriching experience, right? Because it does give you that sense of value, right? Yeah.
And I think that point about forcing yourself, albeit in a awkward way on this occasion, to listen because you have nothing to say. I think that's really the sort of key to that, and thinking about when is the right time to do that, and leave your sort of personal kind of comfort levels behind and do something which is outside of your comfort lesson in order to get a better answer. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Well, I'm conscious we're closing in on time, Amali, but I wanted to kind of give you the floor for any kind of closing comments, just to impart to the audience that's watching. So over to you.
Yeah, and I think we've probably got a real mix of sort of people joining onto this, and the only thing I would leave people with, in addition to obviously what we were talking about earlier, is there is so much out there to help and to support people, whether you're developing as a leader, whether you're already a business leader. Certainly from my side, with Microsoft for Startups, we support B2B software companies, and we do a lot of stuff around both supporting the businesses that helping them with their technologies, helping them with their sales, but also helping the leaders to actually, feel confident to do that better. But so many amazing networks. This is, a primary example of, a free resource which is available there to help people through. So don't feel lonely, I think is probably the biggest lesson which I would leave people with. Grow your networks, keep in touch. touch, reach out to people. And one thing which is, I think, nice, particularly about sort of the tech industry for me, and I think this is with a lot of other industries as well, is when you reach out, if you reach out politely and considerately, 9 times out of 10 people will have time. And don't feel sad if they don't get back to you, because they might just have their own things going on. But, you know, try it. There's nothing to lose.